Here in Coquin, many houses and other buildings are located on the riverbank or nearby on the shores of the Northumberland Strait. But this coastal way of life now involves greater risks because of rising sea levels and coastal erosion. The reality of the climate crisis is top of mind for many residents of southeast New Brunswick, especially in the aftermath of Hurricane Fiona, which hit the region in September 2022. That storm saw water levels reach a maximum of 2.1 meters at the Pointe-du-Chêne tidal gauge station. By 2100, that kind of storm could be an annual event. That's according to experts from the provincial government, the University of Moncton, and the company 2 Pixels Geomatics. They recently published a report examining coastal erosion and flood risks in the region. The results were presented to the public during a series of meetings held by the NB Environmental Network in Bouctouche, Capellet, and Shediac. Their findings shed light on how many buildings or roads might be at risk as maximum water levels during storm surges get higher and higher. For example, by 2100, a storm causing a maximum flood of 3.1 meters could occur every 20 years. That kind of flood could affect more than 1,700 buildings in Shediac alone. The NB Media Co-op spoke to some of the people who turned out for the public presentation in Shediac to get their take on this serious subject matter.
We had a chat about the eco-anxiety that happens right after a hurricane happens. So we experienced that with Hurricane Dorian in 2019. There seems to be that kind of a wake-up call moment that happens. And then there's a lot of conversation and a lot of interest in how to protect ourselves, how to protect our infrastructure, and how to adapt to climate change. And that feeling tends to lose steam over time. And that feeling kind of fades away. And then we stop talking about it. The conversation tends to kind of stop. But with Hurricane Fiona, I think that wake-up call happened again, but a lot stronger. And it's good to see that there's still so much interest in the topic of how to adapt and how to continue to monitor and what to do in terms of mitigation and costs associated to fix our infrastructure, to fix our homes, insurance rates, taxation, everything that comes into play. Over 1 year later, we're still talking about it like it was yesterday. And I think that is very important to keep that conversation moving forward so that we're better prepared for future events. It's always interesting to see the updated models. It's always a little scary, of course. It makes you feel a lot of vulnerabilities, and you feel for people who live along the coastline, for our municipalities, our decision makers that need to take all of these factors into consideration, our city planners. It can be overwhelming to figure out how all those pieces tie together and how we can work together to try to mitigate the impacts, the human impacts and the impacts on our ecological ecosystems.
So tonight my biggest takeaway is the disappointment that I have of the inaction of our government. The presentation, the information presented tonight is great information. Is our government going to do something with it? Not just look at it and put it on the shelf, but act on it. Whenever you got involved with all of these buildings, you've got the municipality that says it's the responsibility of we call it Southeast Regional Service Commission. They're responsible. So you talk to the Southeast Regional Service Commission. They say, we're going by the laws from the Ministry of Environment. So the ball keeps bouncing all the way to the top. And just like a vicious circle, nobody seems to make any decisions. And they keep doing the same thing as what they were doing before.
What brought you here today to this event?
I was interested in what they were talking about, the coastal erosion, because that's something we deal with all the time. And not only coastal, but along lakes and rivers and creeks and things like that, but we also get into the coastal restoration. And some of the things we're talking about here, we did a project this year, we've done several, but we're in the tidal sections of the rivers. We have exactly the same sort of thing as you have on the coast. Maybe we don't have the big waves and things like that, but we certainly have a rise and fall of the tides, and they're rising and falling, and they're great, a lot. So you got a 1.3 or 1.4 or 2 meter rise and fall. things happen along the shoreline. On the Bucktush River now, where the head of tide is at Coates Mills Bridge, or there isn't any bridge there now, but now you can go up to what they call the forks, as a crow flies, probably 2.5 kilometers. We've got brackish water there all the time. Never had before. So the tide and everything else is affecting it. Here in Parley Beach, there's another, they're building houses in the swamp or in the wetland, putting septic systems in and all sorts of things. It causes all kinds of problems.
Those were just some of the people who turned out to a recent event in Shediac about sea level rise and coastal erosion and how it will affect people in the region. The NB Media Co-op was there to record video of the entire event. We'll go to that footage in a moment. But first, just a note, this event did take place in French and also included live interpretation into English by interpreter Jim Couture. He allowed us to record that live interpretation, so it's included here as well for our Anglophone audience. The full event in the original French will also be available on our website, nbmediacoop.org. We have most of the event with live English interpretation, although some parts did have to be cut because of some recording issues on our end. Let us know what you think. What's the best way for communities to address the effects of climate change? Do you think that decision makers are doing enough? Get in touch with the NB Media Co-op at info@nbmediacoop.org. Reporting from Moncton, I'm David Gordon-Koch.
So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out to assist in this presentation. Before starting, I would like to thank members of the team because I didn't work by myself on this project, and they weren't able to participate in this presentation this evening. André Robichaud, professor of geophysics at the Shediac campus at the University of Moncton, and Ariane Boucher, when she's there working on that, says she wants to graduate. She's going to graduate soon from the Sustainable Development Program. So, for this presentation, Mr. Berbe mentioned it a while ago, we're going to have two blocks. I'm going to start by looking at coastal flooding and a brief question period, and then after that, I'm going to look at coastal erosion and finish with a conclusion for our projects. So for each part, whether it be a flooding or erosion, I'm going to do a little overview of the method we used. I don't go in great detail, but for those that are interested, you can look at our reports. The method is really well detailed, but I would here put more emphasis on the results as well as the sectors that are most vulnerable, whether it be erosion or flooding. This is part of the action plan for the government of Brunswick, which is wants to mitigate the impacts of sea level rise and storm surges, and as well as to ensure prepare for the future, be sure that all new infrastructure be built and to adapt and resist to coastal flooding. So there are three main objectives for this study. The first one is the calculation and projection of historical coastal erosion rates based on analysis of aerial photos from the years selected were the years 1940, 1980, 1944 essentially is the most ancient one. It gives us good quality aerial photos to be able to identify the things we need to identify. After that, we have aerial photographs of the 1980s. And finally, the most recent series of aerial photographs was 2022 that were done right after the last post-tropical storm, which allowed us to capture the impact of the coast. The second objective is the selection and application of defined coastal flooding scenarios for each area as presented by GeoNB portal, and to identify the structures, the buildings or the roads that would be at risk of erosion or flooding. And finally, a third objective is to produce a geospatial information, a map of the coastal sectors and infrastructures that would be at risk of flooding and erosion, with their photographs in 2030, but for 2030, 2050, and 2100. So the project started with the report that is available in French and in English. The report is available on the Environmental Network, New Brunswick Environmental Network website for those who want to consult it, and the elaboration of 5 databases. We worked on 5 territories. And so there's 5 databases that are available for groups and organizations that would be interested to look at them and work with them to prepare adaptation plans in the future. So the project was done over 5 local governance regions. As you can see, it's a large part of southeastern New Brunswick. So we worked on in Greater Pointe-du-Chêne, Chanterie, Beausoleil, Shediac, and Acadie. We've had presentations in December for the 4 other territories. This evening, we're going to concentrate uniquely on the Shediac territory, just to mention that we've adopted a uniform methodology between the 5 territories. So for Shediac, the limits of the study is essentially the limits of the new municipality, which is all called a local governance district, which goes from Shediac Cape to the north, going through Gilbert's Corner, and then downtown Shediac right up to Pointe-du-Chêne to the east. It also includes the inland regions, the region of Skiduk, which, because of its geography, they could be affected by climate change. And so when it comes to flooding, the first methodology for flooding scenarios, the scenarios that were utilized in this study were developed by Réal d'Aigle for the entire province and were updated in 2020 based on the most recent data available. And it's a scenario that Mr. Berbe mentioned a while ago. These scenarios are available at the GONB's website. At the GONB, I think there's only 2 storm scenarios. There will be a scenario for 100-year to go to 2100, and so we looked at all types of scenarios. I'll show you the results of that after. It's important to note that these scenarios represent extreme water levels. It's very important to underline the word extreme that could be reached during storm episodes that would coincide with the highest tides. So the scenarios that we're taking into consideration would take 3 factors. First of all, the average sea level rise, according when it was scenario 8.5, which is if we don't attenuate the risk of emissions, it also takes into consideration subsistence of the Earth's surface, the vertical movement of the Earth, which moves a couple of centimeters per decade, and finally, the glacier melt. So what we see on the first graphic on the left, during the last decade, there was an increase of the sea level rise in the Charlottetown region, close to New Brunswick, up about 33 centimeters. And in the future, according to this scenario, we project it going up to 1 meter for the PEI territory. So this scenario, like I mentioned, was created for all of New Brunswick. Over 14 coastal zones. For Shediac, were found in Zone 9, which is characterized by, so we foresee about 16 centimeters of sea level rise between now and 2030 in the short term, so in 7 years. And for 2050, we foresee an increase of about 29 centimeters. And finally, into 2100, we foresee 77 centimeters with a margin of error above 40 centimeters. So it could be 1 meter increase in sea level by 2100. So the scenarios that we utilize for different storms And it produces each storm, like for example, if we take the period of return for 20 years in 2030, we would have a maximum water level reached of 2 meters, more or less, 20 centimeters. So and we took the superior limit for margin of error. So that scenario, we'd consider that the sea level rise could reach 2.2 meters. To give you an example, a recent example, because Fiona storm, as Mr. Berube mentioned in his slides a while ago, at the Pointe-du-Chêne tide gauge station, we measured 2.1 meters, which would correspond with, according to the levels of 2010, a storm that occurs every 5 years, or a storm that or a 5% chance of coming back in 2030. That same scenario could occur every 20-25 years. In 2050, it could occur at more shorter term. We say 20 years, and finally, the same level in this scenario that we realize could reproduce every 1 to 2 years, depending with the average sea level rise. Here I'm just showing you an example of flooding zones to 2.1 meters, which occurred during Fiona. So the yellow points on the card, these would be measurements that were done by the Department of Natural Resources team, that Mr. Berube showed a while ago. So why I showed this map is because it allows us to validate the flooding scenarios used. So as you can see here, the points that we measured with GPS, it corresponds with the majority of the cases to the scenario where we have a lack of data and where the local knowledge could help us a little bit more. It's in the northern part of the sector in the Pointe-du-Chêne where is the zone that is most vulnerable, I think. So, I'm sure you would like, so I'd like to know certainly if there are people who live in that region, that area, and we'd like to speak to you. So the risk of flooding for buildings and roads was assessed using the risk index developed by Michel and applied elsewhere in New Brunswick. The risk index looks at the depth of the water to determine the potential damage to buildings, evaluate the potential damages to buildings, and we look at the possibility of vehicle access to roads. So the index is from 0 to 5. So for the roads, it is considered that access to roads would be considered normal. 5 being the maximum value, so access to roads would be impossible. So two things to retain for the roads. From 0 to 0.3 meters, we consider access to roads become limited. And vehicles, small and medium vehicles, so cars, will start to have difficulty going over those roads, and would be uniquely accessible to trucks and larger trucks. So, second risk for roads is the 0.6 meters. From that point, even trucks and emergency vehicles would have difficulty in passing the road. So access would be would not be able to be used on a regular basis. When it comes to buildings, and the index evaluates the risk, the possible risk damage. So the two values the most important to consider would be starting at 50 centimeters, 0.5 meters, where we consider the damage is average 40. It's the foundations, the buildings, the height of the foundations, and the second value would be 1 meter or a very high risk. So the damage becomes excessively high when the water would go over the foundation, and the 4 on the index would be between 1.5 meters, and that's the maximum risk is considered when it's over 1.5 meters. So we could have problems with the current. It could be a current at that depth. So for the results, the mapping for risk of flooding was done for all different scenarios for storms and all the levels of water. Here in this presentation, we just did have three scenarios, which was the 100 storms that are going to be produced once every 100 years, or it's a storm that would have 1% chance of reproducing every year. And these storms, the scenarios would be, if it happens in 2030, a maximum level of water at 2.6 meters. If it is produced in 2050, we have a maximum water level of 2.8 meters. And finally, if the same scenario occurs in year 2100, we would see a maximum sea level rise of 3.5 meters. These are the three scenarios that we want to present to you this evening. And here on the chart, we have the number of buildings that would be at risk based on the depth of the water. So for a storm scenario of 100 years in 2030, we have a total of 1,235 buildings that could be affected. In comparison, if Fiona put, according to the model, there's 803 buildings that were at risk. At the same storm, if it occurs in 2050, using the same scenario, we would have 200 buildings more, so we would reach 1,433 buildings that could be at risk. And in 2100, at long term, we had almost 2,000 buildings that could sustain damage. So to know here in this study, all the buildings were considered to be independent, and we know that we have a lot of cottages and buildings that are not on solid foundations that could be displaced outside these floodable zones, where we can maybe we can find a solution, but compared to those that are on a solid foundation. So flood risk to roads using the same three scenarios. So a 100-year storm that would be produced in 2030. So the short term could put at risk 14.7 kilometers of roads. 1 kilometer would have a maximum level of water. So more than 1 meter, and if the same storm occurred in 2050, we would have 16.7 kilometers of roads. I can show you on the map after the sectors that are most vulnerable. And finally, if the storm occurs in 2100 over the long term, we would have a total of 25 kilometers of roads that would be at risk of flooding. So this represents about 10% of the routes in the Shediac territory. So on a chart, the numbers don't mean a whole lot, but if we look on the map here, this would be the first scenario, a flooding scenario. So this is a 100-year storm produced in 2030, so 7 years from now. Here on the map, you can see that there's one sector that is notable in Shediac. It is the Pointe-du-Chêne area, where we'd have the most infrastructure that could be impacted by flooding. So buildings, here we would have 51 buildings that could have maximum damage with that type of flooding. And here we have at a level 2.6 meters, so only 50 centimeters more than what we saw during the Fiona storm. Another sector that would be important to mention would be the bridge goes over the Shediac River. We can see that there's starting to be flooding in that area. So for the buildings, there would be one building that would be greatly affected in that region. So if a storm of the same size would produce in 2050, so in medium term, we would have a maximum level of water at 2.8 meters. Once again, we won't take into effect the waves in this particular model, so we will see the number of buildings increase, that ones that are at risk. And once again, the sector most concerning for the municipality will be the Pointe-du-Chêne area behind Parley Beach. So if I'm going to try to compare it with the previous map, you're going to see once again it's the same sector that is at risk, but the red lines where the risk of damage to buildings and is maximum, and access to roads become possible. So we have more red in that area. And this would be the difference between, this is one in 2100. There's, it's close between the rise in the water levels between 2030 and 2050. Over the long term, a storm of the same size produced in 2100, we would have a number of buildings that would create the maximum damage. It increases, you can see on the chart on the left, as in the sector most concerning is the Pointe-du-Chêne sector, as well as the Chapman's Corner and a bit in the north of the territory, where there are cottages. It could be at risk as well. But once again, this is the scenario, but long-term scenario. It would have 1% chance of it could be 1% chance of being produced before that. So, in conclusion, floods such as those caused by Fiona that we experienced recently could become more frequent in the future because of the rise of the average sea level. As I've shown you a while ago in the maps, events like Fiona could become an annual storm by 2100. It could be produced every 10-15 years by 2050. So the scenarios I'm talking about, the 100-year storm, that is the biggest storm we can see in a year, was presented for precautionary measures. We know even if there's weak chances, a 1% chance that it could occur every year, it's the scenario that we must prepare ourselves for, because the water, it takes a lot of time and flooding causes a lot of damage. And finally, the data generated in the study has been compiled into geospatial databases and will be available, and it'd be our pleasure to share them with concerned organizations. So in these databases, there will be precise mapping. And here I remind you that the territory that we've studied is really enormous this year, so it's very difficult to show all the flooding situation. For Shediac, it's the smallest of the municipalities when it comes to the coastal sector that we studied, so we produced more maps, but in the project, I think we have about 300 maps for the 5 regions that show us in detail all the infrastructure, buildings, as well as the roads that could be affected at risk of flooding. And finally, as something I mentioned a while ago, this is a number of buildings and roads at risk of flooding, especially for buildings. When I mentioned, for example, that there could be 2,000 buildings in Shediac that could be at risk of flooding by 2100, remind yourselves that there's 2,000 buildings that could be 1,200 cottages, garages and things like that, but infrastructure that is not on solid foundations, basically. So there would be work to do there in order to determine the amount of damage that could incur. And also, I'd like to mention the importance of a couple of adaptation measures here. I'll show you 2 examples. The first one is east of Shediac, near Cap Brûlé, where we see the mitigation factors outside the maximal zone. So this would be 3.5 meters flood. So this is a 100-year 100-year flood that could occur in 100 years. So they've anticipated in advance by putting that station, making sure it's at risk, always a risk. You can see the lands beside it floods, but not that particular station. We are nonetheless close for to have infrastructure of that infrastructure. That was quite close, but it's better than building a little closer, and then you're flooded, and then you have major environmental impacts. Another example, when it comes in the residential sector here, you see there's a lot of homes, and because of their elevation, they were built on at a certain elevation, so they won't be affected by flooding, although all the sectors around them could be susceptible of flooding risks. So finally, I'm going to look at the 5 territories here. We can see the issue of flooding is not unique to the town of Shediac. And in the 5 territories that we studied, I would say Beausoleil, because it's a lower elevation, that is the territory that with the biggest challenges to manage in the future. But in Shediac, there was, we're nonetheless not far from 2030. We have a high number of infrastructure that could be affected by flooding. So this is closes the part on flooding. So maybe we can have a brief question period, and maybe I'd invite you to. I know the room is small a bit; it's difficult to circulate, but I invite you to look at the maps that we've attached to the walls and the windows on that side. You have a flooding scenario in 2030, so a 100-year flood. 2050 is in the back. And finally, on the window, we have the scenario, the extreme scenario, which would occur every 100 years, and that would be produced in the year 2100. Any questions? It's very technical. Yes, Mr. Bourgeois. The station you mentioned a while ago, did we take into consideration the waves at that point? Or is it just the sea level? It's just the sea level. To say that station is protected by a marsh, and already the effect of the waves is going to be reduced there. So it wouldn't be amplified, but if ever the dunes would disappear, in part, there it could increase the level of risk of that. In the scenario 2030 and 2050, we talk about levels of flood. We don't talk about the frequency of hurricanes and storms that could, with the wind, it could affect the water levels. We're just talking about the sea level, because we know that a storm. Category 1 will bring a certain level of waves, and at 2 and 3 we have more higher waves and more flooding. I'm curious to know if those factors were taken into consideration. In fact, we can see that in the chart. I can point out if there was a Fiona-sized storm. If we look today, we would be close to 2030. The storm could be produced every 25 to 50 years, every 30 years, 40 years, but the same level of water that would have a post-tropical storm Fiona strength in the future will become more and more frequent. So the similar storms, like we see major events today, it could become more common phenomenons, like every spring, let's say. So if I look at the same level of water at my Fiona's 2.1 meters in 2050, it's produced more frequently. So there's more chances of it being produced every year. 2050, once again, more frequent, and 2100 could become an annual event, because of the increase in the size of the storms. It's I have the English term in my mind, storm surge. It's It's the same size of storms produced, but with the storm surge that is higher. So that would cause naturally more flooding. Just to clarify things in my mind, we say that the sea level is rising between now to year 2100. We're talking about 100 centimeters more. And we have a 2.1 meter storm. That means that we add 2.1 meters on top of the 100 centimeters? Exactly. Yep. So we're at 3 meters higher. So the same storm that occurs today at 2.1 meters with 1 meter of increase of the water until between now and 2100 could be 3 meters higher than normal. Do you take into account precipitation? Is that something you take into account? Where certain regions have a lot of rain and needs they need infrastructure that allows the water to circulate. So is this another criteria that must be taken into consideration? The amount of rain we'd get, for example. With the better models and like these that would be that parameter for precipitation. What we did this year, we went along the Buckbush River in northern New Brunswick. We installed 7 zone. It's an estuary that is 20 kilometers long, and to see how the levels varied based on precipitation levels. And obviously, we don't have that tool everywhere throughout New Brunswick, but we're analyzing the data, and what we've noticed, especially after strong rain, how the level would rise quickly, and we were expecting it to go up over 2 or 3 days because the soil retains water. But I think the deforestation is starting to create havoc. So it's impressive. I read articles. One article in particular, I think it was in Bangor, Maine, where they studied the effects of precipitation during a storm. Post-tropical size storm, and they were saying in the estuaries the water level rise was underestimated by 1 meter because of precipitation. So what happened during Fiona, those that lived through it, it's a storm that passed by quickly. The level of water came up quickly and went down quickly, and I don't think there was a lot of precipitation. We did get a good example of what rain could cause. I think it was 80 millimeters, but nonetheless, 80 millimeters is a lot. But all that to say that effectively the scenarios will be better. One day they'll be improved. That's why we try to do the projections. I know for municipal managers it becomes important to make sure you have proper maps and to put limits for construction. But at the same time, the technology is going to evolve, and they're going to improve, and our knowledge is going to improve, and we'll be able to more and more predict the risks of flooding because we're going to include other parameters. With the maps and the scenarios that you're creating, are you able to show the effect of losing natural infrastructure such as dunes? You were talking about the water treatment center, and there's a large marsh in front of it and the dunes. But let's say if we would lose the dunes, would we be able to create scenarios of the loss of that natural infrastructure to show or to estimate the impact that these losses could have on the more inland lands? I understand the question, and Stefan in the back, or Carol, who worked with us on the modelization, but I don't think it exists yet. The models that would show us, that would allow us to add the marsh and the dunes and the effects on slowing down the waves. A little bit more complex, but that as well, it could be improved over the years. When Meher made the presentation in Pointe-du-Chêne, they showed that Pointe-du-Chêne dune could eventually, there could be a lot of breaks created in the dune. The erosion scenarios show that the Pointe-du-Chêne dune, so it's going to allow the water to penetrate easier inland. And the Pointe-du-Chêne harbor, so it's going to create more flooding, in my opinion. And there's a lot of municipalities that are preoccupied by that. People in Tracadie I've always mentioned that question: if we lose our dunes, we have less protection against the storms, and it's going to increase the risks. The risk of flooding and risk of erosion. And it's important in New Brunswick to think about the management of the sediment in the zone, because the dunes and all that is a form of accumulation, and these habitats should receive continually be fed sediment to continue to, as water level rise, it could increase because by taking away the coast, we limit. There's less erosion, but the erosion will allow generate new sand particles that could be accumulated in those areas. But we just completed a study for Mesonet that shows us that oftentimes is 2,000 to 3,000 cubic meters less per year. So by putting a wall, sometimes it has a double effect. So it's all things that we have to take into consideration in our scenarios. By look at the coastal hardening is a problem, and I'm going to present a couple of numbers after on the total artificial things they're doing along the coastal insular region, and there's 40% of beaches that disappeared. So by putting rock walls, yes, it protects, but at the same time, we're losing habitat. And the beaches, oftentimes, it's our first line of defense against storms. It's an issue, and it's an interesting dilemma. Rock walls. In the future, maybe it would become an obstacle more than help if the water can't go there, because blocks are going to go next door if it's not protected. Yes, and we've seen that with Fiona. I'm going to show a picture after where the water went over certain walls and created erosion, and it's going to be an issue, certainly. What I was saying in another meeting in the United States, the United States is seriously thinking about creating trust funds, and when people install walls, that there be money for the governments to one day repair it's one thing to have money to install those walls, but in case once the wall is damaged, the people that have put it into place, they're going to have the financial means to maintain it. So they're going to require in certain states, that the idea is quite advanced, that there would be an emergency fund available for that, and it's the owners that would contribute to the property owners. It's not just the installation of such a structure. It would be the cost of maintenance and the cost of taking the structure away in the future. If you have to take those structures out in the future, you need money to do it. So the stone walls, an effect that it produces is that the beaches in front of it finishes by disappearing. So when the beach disappears, so the wave arrives with more energy, so it hits against the rock wall and it could overflow. So that is one effect. Two, for erosion, oftentimes when one of the property owners installs a rock wall, oftentimes it would dig into the properties in the north or the south, depending on the coast, and the neighbors could have an erosion problem that is more aggravated because of that. Third, on the social aspect, oftentimes it was shown that people who have rock walls in front of their property, the people that are reacting more late because they have false sense of security, they think my property is protected, I don't really need to take any measures at all, which occurs during storms a lot of times, and they're going to be the last ones to leave, thinking they're protected, but when they realize that there's a real danger, we must leave, so it's a bit late when they decide to do it a lot of times. When it comes to the government Department of Environment or Department of Transportation Infrastructure, if they're aware of what is going on in those regions, do they have plans, something they're looking at and developing to try to protect the coastal regions? You're a representative of the government. I'm going to be the spokesperson for the government of New Brunswick, I guess. We have a lot of difficulty with the Department of Transportation that believes that 4 or 5 years at a time, and no more than that, because of political reasons, or probably. I don't know if you heard this weekend, Mezinet, we're looking at changing and moving a route. When it's a private road, it's a little bit more complicated, but they need financial support from the government to move infrastructure that is situated there. But when Fiona hit last year, there was certainly colleagues in Fredericton, the Department of Environment, that wanted to go resuscitate our famous policy on coastal zone protection. That policy is sadly we would like to take certain elements from that policy and incorporate it in existing laws and really put buffer zones that are efficient, a little more efficient. But what I think was missing in that policy right from the start are quantifiable objectives. And it's well and good to say, I want to protect the dunes, but if you never name a percentage of the coastline you want to protect, or it finishes that when we receive requests from the government, they don't know what to answer, because, is the coast overdeveloped now in certain sectors? Can we develop it further? So there's a lot of work left to do in the zoning, the way we can develop our coastlines over the next decade. But it's another anecdote I could. I went to visit 2 weeks ago at the Francophone Association of Municipalities in Brunswick to show them tools that they showed incredible tools they have on their computers, to manage political assets, when to change valves and sewers and things like that. But ask the question: if they want one day to have if they came to climate change, and now they're starting to think about it seriously, and they're applying for federal monies this year. But there's work to be done. It's stunning that we're not further. It's at least 20 years that we have a policy on the coastal zones. I'm sorry. It was destructive in the Pointe-du-Chêne region, the storm in 2002. The ice came into the inland. Is there a scenario that shows that the ice will cause greater flooding? It pushes ice onto inland, like we saw in January, I think. I don't know. There's no scenarios that can forecast that. On the same subject, on ice, I had the question from a journalist who called me, and I said, I'm not the person to ask that question. He wanted to know that the fact that the ice in the bay protects us usually, and ice only comes in a little bit later, how would it affect coastal erosion and things like that? What we saw in a study we did, I talked about Mezinet, but it's the most recent study in the Bay of Chaleur as well. We have less and less ice, and it's not iced up yet at this time. But we didn't see any acceleration of erosion yet in the Mezinet region over the last 10, 15 years. However, timing is important. If the storm arrives at low tide and the risks are reduced, but we need. The storms have to come at high tide and have the winds in the right direction. You saw a storm with the southeast winds one time. Maybe the coast here you were not greatly affected by it, but there is a lot of work. That a lot of modelization needs to be done, and then after that, the great difficulty is going to have the political will, and I would dare say the political courage to make decisions that'll be to start to change our way of managing our territory, but even start relocating people that are at risk. One of the questions I received from Emergency Measures New Brunswick after Fiona, do we have a map that shows the imminent zones with imminent risk of flooding or erosion, so emergency measures can intervene as quickly as possible? We don't have those products, though. In fact, we could create them for a certain part of the coastline, but we don't have all the information for the entire coast. So there is still a lot of work to be done. What is interesting is that there's more and more financing available for studies, but the expertise is hard to find. In fact, the modelization, there's a lot of consultants that are able to produce interesting models, but these are it's the basic data to nourish it. You know, the depth of the water in front of the beaches, for example, that would have an impact on the energy from the waves, because we need maps that would show everything in great detail, the depth of the water in front of the coastlines. That's one example. And there are others. Just the total erosion. We looked at there's some zones where we have virtually no data from Beldoon to Campbellton. Not a whole lot Bay of Fundy. Hardly any data for Bay of Fundy because it's a zone that's less at risk and we have less requests for information. But I had a journalist that phoned me up Thursday of last week, CBC News, wanted to know what happened over the last 3 storms, because there was some impact because of the southeast winds. So yeah, we do what we can with the time and expertise that is available to us. And historically, it's 10,000, 12,000 years that people have been living here. The Vikings, or if anybody tried to see over the different storms, where was the coastline before? Maybe 100 kilometers further out to sea. Is there any research that has been done on that? I'm going to show a map after of the Geological Society of Canada that shows there's a bit of speculation behind that, but we're going to show that the sea level was a lot lower. And effectively, we can almost walk to Prince Edward Island at that point. And the coast moved inland at a certain speed because the water level has not always risen in a gradual manner. Either there was periods where the sea level rose quicker. But effectively, what has changed a lot is in the last decade is that just think of the natives that would go from one season to another, would go from one area. You know, they wouldn't put permanent campsite. There were nomads, and it was a good way to adapt. Maybe we might have to go to that type of lifestyle. Maybe be able to move around quite easily. But it's a question of time when if we build infrastructure along the coastline. The question we would have to move. You know, it's not if we have to move, it's when. And with our models, as we're trying to predict, when will the risk would be too high and unsustainable? And we see that over the years, there's psychologists would join teams such as ours, and people are more and more nervous living along the coastline. It's not perfect. It could be hard on the nerves sometimes. Inaudible, I'm sorry, I didn't hear reset. No, a good trailer can be moved on quite quickly. When it comes to insurances, those that living along the coastline, when you talk about moving, I think, one moment, people are already starting to move. When someone is flooded over several years, you know, the insurance company, does it stop at covering them after a period of time? Oh, yeah. So if you continue living in the same place, you have that risk. In Quebec, they're more proactive. I think they have a rule in Quebec is that if you're less than 5 meters from the coastline, municipalities force you to relocate, and financial compensation is given. And there's But do we think about that around here? It could even happen in Bathurst downtown. There was landslides along, and there was several properties at very high risk, but they had good financial compensation for that. There's Pointe-du-Chêne as well. If you look at the maps, it's scary. Yeah, we don't have any good news to announce you. That's for sure. We were told about, and there was research been done about the rise of sea level, and the data you presented here, is it based on the data, the evaluation that were done recently? I think there's a gentleman that works at Natural Resource, Tom James, maybe. In fact, what came from that is that we published the scenario and we adjusted them for New Brunswick. But in certain cases, it showed that the water was going to rise. It wasn't going to rise as high as we thought. But these things the scenarios are continue to evolve, and as science moves forward and the climate changes as well, so we'll see. But I think it takes more mechanisms for adaptation, and at a point in time, we have to create a feeling, a sense of urgency. If the buildings and the roads are too close to the coastal areas, and if they're at high risk, we have to relocate them because it becomes unlivable, unsustainable, and it costs a lot for all society. Passing and people live internally inland are not happy to be having to pay for properties that were damaged during storms. So before we exhaust all subjects, I think we're already in the second half. I don't know if you want to take a mini break, maybe. Or continue right away with the second part of the presentation. We're going to talk about erosion. Usually we would have stopped for 10-15 minutes and take a coffee. I don't know if anybody have to go to the washroom. Maybe we'll stop 5 minutes and we'll set up a presentation. We'll talk about erosion. And thank you, everyone. We're going to restart our presentation. It is a slide that I presented earlier, but I want to present it once again because there's the last part of the text here that is very important. Our data is going to help protect infrastructure, but there's also, especially for me, it's conservation of our coastal habitats. We're going to present some numbers on that, and it's going to be quite stunning. You're going to see how a coast can degrade quite rapidly because when it comes to sea level rise, as soon as it rises, all the habitats that move within inland. If we stop that, well, we start creating all kinds of problems. Once again, I have a couple of slides to the Professional Association of Engineers and Geoscientists produce this data. It's good that I can present to engineers that are going to be my next collaborators in our project, because they as well they have to rely on coastal phenomena. We don't have any schools in New Brunswick or in the Maritimes for coastal engineers, but it's lacking here. But there's some people that do that kind of work, but it's not comparable to what we see in the United States. You see a picture here that was taken by the federal government a couple of days after Fiona, and I think it's 24th of September. We see that the rock walls didn't always resist. For an example of the region, of the Barachois region, where we had overtopping, the water went over the walls and it created erosion on the other side of the rock wall. You can see that clearly, but the rock walls along the coastline is not the best solution. It could help maybe for a couple of decades, but it requires maintenance, and there are costs, important costs associated with that, but it has a lot of impact on the natural habitat. This is a coastline change. Where the coastlines of New Brunswick were of Atlantic Canada really 6,000 years ago. I don't know if you see right here between Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, there was just a little bit of water. The Northumberland Strait is 15, 20 meters deep, and the sea level, according to Geological Society of Canada, is 15 meters less than what it is today, and the waters rose. And this is an average of 25 centimeters per century, which is about a foot a year. That is what we've seen the last century, but that's not going to stop. I always show this slide to put things into context. Even if we'd stop emitting greenhouse gases tomorrow, the sea level will continue to rise because we're in an interglacial period. The climate was warming up anyway, and now sea levels were rising. But why? Like I said a while ago, when the water level rises, it's a question of time before we have to move our infrastructure. And it's not this century, it's going to be the next century. Do you know the coastal squeeze effect? The coastal compression, it has become more common as far as terminology, and we have to understand that as the sea level rises, habitat must be displaced, and if we put a rock wall on the coast, we can lose a lot of habitat until we lose it completely. In New Brunswick, our estimates show that we have several numbers that are presented here, a couple of statistics, but there's also already a good part of our beaches there that could risk 30% risk of being lost. And at the end of the century, we feel we might lose 3/4 of those beaches. So it's really a phenomenon to consider. If we put walls everywhere, we're going to kill our beaches and possibly the dunes that are adjacent to it. And if the dunes disappear, well, the marshes behind it will also be at risk of erosion as well. There's a myth that people think that the marshes is a great tool to mitigate the erosion, but erosion occurs where the water's calm. Take the dunes away in the front, and the marshes are going to disappear like snow in the sun. They're going to erode quite quickly, and so the marshes have functioned well, and by default they will. But if you take away the beaches and the dunes, well, the marshes are going to erode quite quickly. So it doesn't look good for future years. So we have losses that are already important habitat losses. No. There you go. There. So you've heard of the International Union for Conservation of Nature that proposes conserving at least 30% of the planet by 2030. To arrive at that in New Brunswick, the objectives have not been defined yet. They're not clear, and we think about the future generations. What land could we leave them? You know, I include myself in there. I'm 66, so I'm part of the last baby boomers. We already see us dying up, but there's going to be other people on the planet after us, and we have to give them a planet and coastlines that are beautiful, and that are fun to live in as well. If we have 30% coastal region, then you look at the kilometers of coastline we have by region. And the Bay of Chaleur, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, that's all the coastline between Miscou and Kashibouquac and the Northumberland Strait as well, and the Bay of Fundy. When it comes to percentages, if we apply that, how many kilometers of coastline we want to keep in a natural state for generations to come, it's quite a challenge, but that's 30%. So what we're going to do as far as the measurement to try to protect the coastline and to keep it as natural as possible in the future, I don't have the answer. But it's going to, once again, take political will. If you look at minimum standard 30%, if I remember right, I made a presentation. I think there was about 10% of the territory that was protected or is considered, I don't know what terminology to use, but the conservation status But it's only like 10% of our coastlines. Now, when it comes to, we're going to talk about erosion, because as the water level rises, obviously there are erosion problems. Our team, we do a lot of monitoring. We try to do, we have winter monitoring sites a bit everywhere. It's a big province, and we're a small team, so it's difficult to cover the entire province. But we're going to give you an example. Shediac, the famous Parley Beach. What happened during Fiona? We saw that the dunes were damaged. We have the precise numbers. I'm going to show them to you. We look at the beach from the side, and these are measurements that were done with the land surveys. You see the red line, that was the surface of the dune after the storm, and so we lost a part. A part was transferred. Sometimes the outward, sometimes the sand comes back 2 or 3 years later. Maybe you've known it that after a couple of storms, that maybe 2 or 3 years without storm, part of the sand comes to the coastline. But that was a loss of 10 meters. The dune lost a lot, but it seems to. Obviously, you're aware that apparently there's you can see the quantity of sand that was added to the beach at the end of the 1980s up to 2019. But I have those right up to Dorian. There's average 7,000 cubic meters per year that are added to the beach, and allows to maintain it, to keep it in place. So it's not such a big quantity. What's interesting is that there's a company that was mandated to calculate the volumes it would take to maintain the beach in a good state, and they were stunned that they would do with 7,000 cubic meters to maintain the beach in a good state. It's not, but it would take the right type of sand, and so the discussion will start. It's not easy in New Brunswick to find sand to fill in those beaches. And after Hurricane Dorian, you see, this was the effects of Dorian in 2019. 7 or 8 months later, in the following fall, you see that you wouldn't think Dorian had impact on the coastline at all. It functions quite well. It was the same principle for Dorian. The dune backed up with 6 meters. Part of the sand was transferred, and there's a part of the sand that went more towards the west, a little bit more complex, but with a quantity of sand that it's possible to maintain a sand system like that. It can be done, but you were lucky. You don't realize it. But the famous in Pointe-du-Chêne, the source of sand to feed in your dune, it is close. It is accessible, and it's easy to access. And it's not the same everywhere in New Brunswick. You probably wouldn't be able to do the same thing in Bugdouche, even in Maisonnette. So at least we have that here for the Shediac region. And finally, I just want to mention a few words about the studies. I talked about the erosion at the short term. We're studying also the effects of long-term coastal changes. 2040, there's a lot of people that have worked on these studies over the years. These are students from the University of Moncton. We have one that's studying a master's. You see how they're old computers. These are products from another era. But we started middle of the 1990s to do GIS technology assisted by technology by computers. But there's certain students that have even opened their own consulting firm, and Meher is a good example. He succeeded to creating a job in this. And there's good tools online if you want to know the total erosion in the province. You go to GeoNB. It's completely free. We have a database that is updated once again. I don't think we integrated all the most recent data when it's coming. There's a series of dots that are on the cart. Click on the dot, and it'll show you the erosion. Sometimes it could be accumulation, but it also allows you to access if you go down the menu, you can upload maps and PDF where it shows the historical erosion, how the coast has moved since the 1940s, 1980s, and to give you an idea at what speed, we can multiply that by 1, 2, or 3, and for the future, are they going to double? Are they going to triple the levels of erosion? But if the water rises 2 or 3 times quicker, the erosion is going to occur at the same speed. So I'm passing it over to Meher, and you're going to have specific data for Shediac on a question of erosion. So for the second part, we're going to look at coastal erosion. The difference between flooding. We spoke about flooding. Oftentimes these are phenomena that are occurred over a short period of time. So we've got high water levels, and then it's going to withdraw. But to close off that section, remember that the scenario that I showed you, as well as the water levels, these are phenomena that are going to maybe last a couple of hours, couple of days, but it's not the normal situation. In contrast, for coastal erosion, when a coast, a certain type of coast, such as cliffs that back up, it's a definitive back up. There's no cliff that goes forward. It's so the cliff, it's a more dynamic, but more often than not, the tendency in New Brunswick is the erosion doesn't come back. So a little overview of the methodology that we utilized. We calculated the totals of erosion for the 5 territories in this project, starting with 4 series of aerial photos that I'd mentioned at the start. We had those that were done from 2022 that were taken post-Fiona. Aerial photos does not cover the entire coast in New Brunswick, just a part of the coast. And where we had gaps in our data, we utilized photos that were quite recent from 2020. These cover the interior of estuaries in the territories, so more in the rivers. We also have access to analog photos in the paper format from the years 1982 and 1983. And also older photos with their good quality to determine the position of the coastline. These were analog photos from 1944 and 1945. So so there was work that was of georeferencing done. So the 2022 photos, we have a chance to. If you look on the pictures, they're very well positioned when it comes to replacement. When the 1982 and 1944 photos, these are paper pictures or photos that we had to within the control points, we had to identify either buildings or trees that are a little bit more difficult, routes that existed since 1944, and we can still identify today. So here, this is an example here of the work accomplished here with the same buildings. I think it's in the Beausoleil region, I think the first picture. So this is the same building in 2022. In 2020, you can see in 82. And then finally, in 1944, we tried to interpret exactly where the corner that the building was going to eventually be there. So this gives us an idea of the quality of the data we had to work with. So a photo, as soon as the pictures were positioned, we had to position the older photos. We mapped various coastlines that have access to beaches, and we're going to see that we have data from 1944, 1980. A lot less inaudible. When it comes to we mapped the limits, the dunes, the cliffs. A couple of pictures I can show you here. The artificial protection when it comes to rock walls or protective walls. As well as for cliffs, because we consider that is where there's most impact on infrastructure. So as you can see here, the cliff is still a little bit, the top of the cliff's a little bit, but as soon as the summits of those cliffs reach the infrastructure, that's going to cause problems. For the dunes, it would be the limits of the vegetation, and unless that the dune was next to a cliff. And for the marshes, we showed limits of vegetation. So that work was done for the years 2022, and we had three positions on the coastline. For example, the red line corresponds to where it was at 1944, and blue a little bit closer. It's from 1980, 1982, and after that's the position of the actual coast. From that, these 3 points, we can measure the displacement of the coastline. The last things, the sectors that are most vulnerable, where we measured the high, most aggressive erosion, was once again at Parley Beach in the period between 1944 to 1982, and also east of the port of Shediac. I'm going to show you next. The Pointe-du-Chêne street, it's located here. And the reason, because we observe higher risks of the higher number of buildings at risk, is because of the proximity of the buildings to the current coastline. So these buildings are very close to the coastline. Now, for the Parley Beach region, maybe I can zoom in on this map. So if we predict the levels of erosion we've noticed between 1944 and 1982, so in 2100, the position could be the red line that you see here on the screen. In 2030, it would be orange line. And I'm sorry, 2050 it was the orange line, and the yellow line would be the position. If we don't maintain a program in place, we think it will be important backup when it comes to the coastline. Before going to the conclusion, I'd like to mention that here I'm going to show you a couple of examples of maps, but if you'll notice here, for the people that are interested, there's the maps that are produced for the entirety of the territory. There I only show 2 sectors, but the Parley Beach and the Pointe-du-Chêne Street. But but we have complete mapping for the entire territory and the infrastructures that be at risk. It can. I'm a resident of Cap Brûlé. You can see the position of the water surge. These are at 4 meters of elevation. And that is, according to Google Earth, I think it's quite close to the elevation levels, imagine. We spoke about that earlier. The dunes that you see, that are associated with that photo. I live on the coastline at Cap Brûlé, and those dunes, there's at least 3 storms that they've been flattened completely. That includes a Hurricane Fiona, a Dorian, and the storm in December 2010. I didn't have a chance to see what occurred after January 2000, but probably 4 storms that flattened the dune. So it becomes a situation where there's no longer any protection from the dunes. The whole marsh becomes part of the sea during a storm, and there are 4 meters. There's great risk for erosion. After Hurricane Dorian, I went to visit the fence in front of the cells, and against the fence was debris from the sea. In other words, the waves had come right up, and it came in, and without a doubt, flooded these cells. Oh, for the cells, I'm coming back on the flooding part. But in the models similar to the ones we've done after Fiona, we've noticed that the water could come very close. But I said that was a good practice to put the water treatment stations ahead of the maximum level of flooding possible. So if you want. If you think elevation is 4 meters, and we project between now to 2100, the major floodings could go to 3.5 meters. So there, the water would come up to very close on the borders of the water treatment center. I didn't do any to see if there were incidents of if there was overflowing water in the pack. But I admit that here we have a limit when it comes to for the water treatment centers. Yes, it's at 4 meters, so they took precautions, the highest precautions from the flooding predicted. But it's not the best decision to put those water treatment centers close to the sea. What 3.5 meters is that at calm water? Is that with the storm surges as well? That would be including a large storm that would occur in 2100, not currently. Well, Fiona, I live on the coastline, and my property is 4 meters high, and the summit of the waves was at the level of my cliff. So after Dorian, during Dorian, my basement, it's 4 meters elevation, had flooded. Because we lost the power, the sump pump wasn't working. So that is at the same level of elevation as the water treatment center. One thing important to mention, at 3.5 meters that I'm talking about is in the 4 meters you're mentioning. That we're not maybe looking at it the same way. We have to know exactly what 4 meters of elevation is, because in New Brunswick, for example, before we realized, so it is. It's a reference guide. We say 4 meters. The zero is maybe here. Today we utilize myself when I talk about 3.5 meters of elevation. It's based to 2013 numbers, and there's a difference between those two. If I do the conversion, 3.5 meters. Based on a new system, it would correspond to 4.3 meters in the former system. So that is really important to keep in mind. You know what numbers you're using to compare the values, because there's a difference of 60 centimeters between the two. It's complicated a little bit there, and it becomes technical a little bit. But if we look at the marshes, the tides, for example, if we go to Canada Tides map. The data is posted it's a different system, so the conversion is completely different there as well. So if I put everything, you're the same system for everything, maybe at the end of the presentation I can show you the data, and I can show you exactly the right elevation based on the same system we're using now compared with the 3.5 meters that I present on the screen. Currently, in my observations since 2020, there is a modernization project by the commission, and they want to spend up to $40 million or more to modernize everything. Have you been consulted before those decisions were made? Recently, after the presentations we had done, the one in Pointe-du-Chêne, and I know the people who are working on that project from the Francophone Municipalities Association in Brunswick. Meher Chelbi was his name, and I think they had a meeting with Mr. Chelbi here to integrate the climate elements in the renewal plan for infrastructure, because most of infrastructure in Canada, especially water treatment centers, but most of the infrastructure started to be older and is at the end of their life cycle, so they're due to be replaced. And there's major projects financed by the federal government that are being done. So now they're trying to integrate the climate risks into their development plans. So they've contacted us to have access to the data on erosion and flooding. They utilize an online system where they can visualize the current infrastructure versus the risk of erosion and risk of flooding. But I think they're working now to integrate those two factors into their renewal plan. Thank you. And the last thing, maybe after the presentation, because I had other questions here. We had talked about erosion, I presented to Kapazzi. This is a coastal area that is more dynamic, so it evolves a lot. And it would not surprise me that it would be a vulnerable area. So I think I have the presentation from Kapazzi on my computer. I could show you the map of that sector after. Because it's a dynamic area, is the restoration of is the restoration project for the Dudes. Do you think that would be effective? Would that work in that type of situation? I learned from Dominique that it had a lot to do with the winds. If it's going to function or not, I'm not sure. If you have an idea of how we would protect the dunes. I will give you an answer more philosophical, if you will. Humans, we always try to pinpoint something to what fluctuates naturally, because we know in certain areas we're trying to maintain it in the same position, and we're fighting against nature. So one of the solutions for adaptation is to leave let nature run its course for living shorelines. Certainly are effective. Give you an example. The Valorez Research Institute has done a project to stabilize dunes in Le Goulet. At the same time, Natural Resources Canada, during the same time, we're doing a modelization for flooding. So they took the data before the interventions that were done before to protect the dunes, and they've noticed that these techniques allowed to protect the homes. I think there's a nursing home, very close to that region. So there was a nursing home, among others, that was infrastructure that was very vulnerable. So they went directly behind the dune, and every time they had big flooding, usually the water would get very close, and in the scenarios, they predicted that it was going to flood. Since those interventions, they've installed barriers in bamboo. They tried also to install lobster cages as well, and they've noticed that there was an improvement. So it gives a certain amount of protection, except that let's say if the storms continue and damage those structures, naturally the dune is going to go back to its old cycle. So for that technique, I know there's a big movement right now for coastal living coasts, but it takes a follow-up to see what is the impact on the coastlines.